Hello, and welcome to Help Not Handcuffs, a day in the life. My name is Nina Richtman, and I work for NAMI. I'm the director of the Justice Diversion Task Force, and I welcome you today. I'm glad you're here. Today we have a panel of folks that all have connection with restorative justice, and it's my great pleasure to share the screen with them today. I'm going to go over a few components, reminders for the audience, and then we'll get started. So first of all, I want to orient you to this. Please put questions that you may have for the panelists in the Q&A box. If you need technical assistance, please use the chat function. The webinar today will be recorded, and we will send that out to everyone who has registered for the event. We'll send that after the event, and it will also be available on the NAMI website. And I also want to let you know that if you registered for this event, you have access to the documentary Circles. And this features Eric Butler, who is on our panel today. And you have access to this until October 23rd. So please take the opportunity to view that documentary if it's of interest to you. And so with that, I would like to give a brief overview of restorative justice. It is a system of criminal justice which focuses on rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with victims and the community at large. In essence, what it does is it repairs the harm that is caused by the crime, and it allows for healing of the person that was harmed, and also provides space for accountability and growth in a genuine way for the person who caused the harm. So with that, I would like to move over to our panelists. And what I would like to have you do, panelists, is to give us a brief introduction of who you are and what connects you to restorative justice in your personal or professional life. So I'd like to start first with Judge St. Clair. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection?
Good afternoon. My name is Wesley St. Clair. I am a retired Superior Court judge from King County, which is located in Washington, in Seattle. It's around the 12th largest geographic jurisdiction in the United States. I retired in 2019 after around 30 years as a judge. In 2011, I was assigned to the juvenile department of the court and remained there until I retired. I was the chief judge of juvenile court there for around 5 years, my last 5 years task. In the course of being in juvenile court, you sit at the intersection of child welfare, the intersection of education schools, as well as the criminal legal processing systems, both criminal and civil, actually, because in the state of Washington, truancy is a thing. And so young people who do not attend school, they can be and oftentimes are referred to the courts for intervention. As I was sitting in that role, it became evident to me that what we were doing for young people was not working. Putting young people in jail for not going to school and detention for not going to school was a completely ineffective process to engage with them. And so I began exploring. At the same time, we were kind of beginning some work, building a new facility, court facility, which included a detention facility, and the community was up in arms of the amount of money that was being spent to keep jailing essentially Black and brown children. I engaged with community as I was the main liaison, at least from the court side, and became curious as to, so what's the proposal? What does it look like? In the course of that, I was introduced to peacemaking circles. I was a reluctant participant in that process because it felt like woo-woo. I didn't want to hold hands. I didn't want to sit in circle. And so I was a reluctant participant, but then I found that it really became a very effective way to engage deeply with issues that are evident in the community, the trauma, the generational trauma, and be able to engage with issues of institutional racism and how it is manifested in our legal processing systems, both adult and juvenile. And so I became a first interest in it, and then I became a real advocate of it. Initiated a couple of pilot programs of using Circle as the technology to improve accountability outcomes. And so I retired in 2019. We had some fairly significant incidents occur that kind of detracted from the ability to really push it forward. I think we did a good job of pushing it forward in the with schools, but as far as the criminal legal processing system with juveniles, there was a pretty intense commitment to keep doing exactly what we had been doing, which from my perspective didn't work well.
Hey, Judge St. Clair, I'm going to interrupt you real quick. Thank you for that introduction. We'll touch on some more of that in a little bit, but I'm going to move us along to the next person. So thank you for that introduction. So Tawana Jackson, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the group and tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to restorative justice.
Hello, my name is Tawana Jackson. I'm a mom, I'm a veteran, and my connection to restorative justice is upon exiting the military. I didn't realize how much of an impact mental health and incarceration and just those barriers were. Upon exiting the military, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. In that transition, I committed 8 felonies. I got 8 felonies in one day. So I went from being this decorated person who was in the military to a person who was formerly incarcerated. Upon exiting out of that system and getting my own pardon, writing in, the internet wasn't in back then. So I wrote in, got my pardon, and I realized that I wasn't the only person in my community who had these issues. They didn't know that they could get a pardon. They didn't know that they could take their life back. I saw so many children, just like the judge said, that were entering to the school to prison pipeline. So it just kind of fueled the passion and the raw emotion and lived experience that I had to form my own nonprofit that kind of caters towards the umbrella of behavioral health, not only for veterans, but also for persons who are entering back into society who's been formerly incarcerated. So I'm a very huge advocate of just catching it when they're young. Just like the judge said, you know, not putting them in YDC just because they're late for school. Find some tangible resources that are really, you know, I like to say tangible resources, not just, you know, little resources that we can dangle in front of people. So that's my connection. And then when that happened to me, I didn't realize my son, who's also a veteran, ended up going through his own process with the law. So that just made my life's purpose even that much more greater. So that's my connection, is just the lived experience, the passion, and seeing people around me, fellow friends, peers, colleagues, having experienced that same thing, but coming out on the other side.
Great, thank you. Glad to have you here today. Eric Butler, please go next. It's great to have you here. You're muted, Eric.
I am muted, you're right. My name is Eric Butler. I'm a father, a friend, a brother, a son, and a member of this human family. I started doing restorative justice back in 2008. And I hate to say doing it because restorative justice is something that you do. But I had just moved to Oakland, California from New Orleans right after Hurricane Katrina. And I was doing a lot of speaking engagements. And then one day, Fania Davis called looking for me. And when Fanya calls, you just go and see what she wants. And she wanted to give me a job. Now, I'd already had a job working at Catholic Charity, so I'd already had an idea of what circles were because I was doing circles. I was butchering them, but I was doing them nevertheless. So Fanya had an idea because the Office of Civil Rights was suing the school district because it was spending too many Black boys. So upon getting the call from Fanya, if Fanya had asked me to just eat vegetables every day, I would have did it. But upon the call, I really didn't listen to what the request was. I just knew that I was going to say yes. They wanted to do restorative justice in Oakland to kind of balance the suspension rates between Black boys and their white counterparts. And I didn't think they were really even serious because they sent me to a Mennonite school to learn about restorative justice. And at the school, I learned about theory. The theory was right on. They left out huge chunks because it was primarily white women teaching Black people how to talk to other Black people. So I had to fill in the skeleton that way. And my first day of school, it sucked. And I realized it sucked because I realized that how the huge amount of love that I have for kids, I really didn't like them. I have some of them myself. I didn't like those. I mean, I love them, but I didn't want to hang out with them. So building relationships was hard for me because I came in with this adult mentality that you have to do what I say do eventually. But it wasn't until I began to have parallel relationships that I had some success. Now, all that being said, I was the first person hired in the United States as a full-time restorative justice coordinator at a school. So I'm sure we'll have other questions, and I'll leave that at that. I won many awards. I'm not sure what the name of them are, but they all have peace in them somewhere.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Elena Wright, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Elena, and I am a member of NAMI National as an employee. I work here at NAMI National, but I come to this panel as a former member and chairperson of the Bucks County Community Accountability Program, which I chaired for over 5 or 6 years, but was a member of for over 10 years. And that panel served as an alternative to official court involvement. So we had first-time offenders who would come before us, and we could mandate anything aside from, punitive, consequences. We could, kind of ask, have you seen a therapist? Have you applied for any type of assistance? How can we help connect you to the community so that way we can prevent this from happening again? Because our biggest thing was we wanted to stop it where it was starting, because we all know that once the punitive system gets going, it only gets worse for most people, for a lot of people. Once they have a record, it's hard to get employment, it's hard to gain access to other things. So the Bucks County Community Accountability Program was trying to stop that in its tracks. And we were a small program, started with the youth aid panel, and then that eventually got moved into the adult system, which I was a part of. And that's how I've come to be here.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to move into some general questions. I'm going to point you towards who I want to have answer it to start, but I welcome if any of the panelists have something additional to add. You're welcome to add in your thoughts after the person I first direct the question to has their chance to answer. So I'm going to start with you, Eric. And what I'm wondering about, Eric, is can you tell us a little bit more about what draws you to restorative justice? What about it makes you want to keep working in this space? What is it that pulls you in and keeps you there and makes you believe in it as a practice? You're muted, Eric.
You're right again. I was muted. The amount of success that we've had in restorative justice, the first year was kind of like just practicing. That's what I prefer the title restorative practice, because that's all we were doing was practicing. The second year is when we really started to do big things. Everybody wants to do restorative justice when it's first introduced until it's time to start doing it. So that being said, the second year we had major success. Suspensions went down 50%. The third year, suspensions went down 100%, and graduations went up 100%. So there had to be something to this building relationship thing. So it made me actually study restorative justice and what justice is. I love the idea of justice. To us at Talking Peace, justice is having the freedom to practice your values. And the evidence of that is every time we've seen somebody try to practice their values out loud to create justice, they're usually cut down. I enjoy the success. I love being an educator. There's nothing sweeter about being an educator than 10 years down the road, those kids that you had 10 years ago still remember your name and still want you in their life. Every kid that I've worked with are still vital parts of my life. So that's the most exciting thing about restorative justice to me. I've always wanted to be famous, to the extent that I've done things to make myself famous. I played football. I've been a singer, but there's nothing that beats the accolades that I get when I'm in Oakland and young people see me and they tell other young people that I am the one that helped change their life and made them who they are today. So the biggest gift in education for me is, since we don't get money for it, is those accolades that we get from the young people whose lives we change.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I wrote down having the freedom to practice your values. I really like that. That's a great takeaway.
I got more.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to Judge St. Clair. Talk to us about restorative justice as a diversion strategy. What have you seen in terms of data around reoffense rates, diversion from incarceration? And what I'm really interested in is, what do you see as the overall benefit for community healing?
You know, one of the challenges always is for institutions to engage in change. Institutions hate change, and anything that is a shift in the power dynamic. So the work I do really points to the power dynamics that exist. In schools, oftentimes when there is a dispute among that happens in a classroom, oftentimes the teacher is disinclined to participate in a restorative practice model of an intervention, because it means ultimately means they need to be responsible for something. You know, I use this adage: if you're pointing fingers at what someone else did, then the reality is there's 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. And so you have to have the insight and the self-reflectiveness to say, well, what do I own of this? And that means there is a shift in the power that occurs. You know, the greatest examples of the impact that restorative practices, and Mr. Butler, I don't like using the term restorative justice because that kind of says, oh, this is a justice system issue. When the reality is, it is every system issue, whether it's in healthcare, housing, financial, education, you name the system, then you find the outcomes of institutional racism impacting, and people don't like the fact sometimes that I talk about this, that, you know, that I'm trying to learn how to speak my truth in a way that oftentimes make white people uncomfortable. But the reality is, if we aren't willing to engage in the conversation that talks about race, which is the elephant in every room, then we're not really willing to do the work. And, you know, I don't see restorative practices as a program. Oh, let's try this program. Restorative practices is a paradigm shift of how we view each other, at least from my perspective, that we're viewing each other with respect and dignity and trying to enhance the ability for there to be healing, not only of self, but also the healing of the community as a whole. So the most astounding numbers that I've seen with regard about the impact of restorative practices actually comes out of Oakland and the Oakland Unified School District. They've come up with phenomenal outcomes about graduation rates, suspension rates being reduced, approaching zero, graduation rates increasing. But again, I say that one of the challenges is when you're dealing with, you have these other institutions like in the educational system, you have schools, teacher union, who say, I really don't want to participate in this because that's going to impact, so you have all the administrative pieces in place that really don't want to engage because they don't want to change. They want to keep the structure so they're able to continue to, I'm not saying intentionally perpetuate, but it actually ends up to intentionally perpetuate systems of oppression.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you. I'm gonna take your lead and I'm gonna think about this as restorative practices moving forward. So my next question goes to Tawana. How do you think restorative practices, how are they beneficial to folks that live with a mental health condition or a mental illness?
For me personally, that was my personal situation. Not knowing at the time that I did have this mental health diagnosis upon exiting the military. So for me, just like both Eric and the judge said, it's vital that it's a collaborative effort. The behavioral health systems, the educational systems, and all the infrastructures, all of those make up this one, they're a part of this one big system. And for me, if you guys didn't know that, the jails and prison systems are the #1 place where persons with mental health barriers and challenges are housed. So, I mean, when you think of a, psychiatric hospital or Georgia Regional or West Central, the people who you think that have these quote unquote mental health challenges, or I like to say behavioral health, because your behavior changes. So whether you went from making straight A's to F, that was something happened. Something made that child go from A's to F. So I don't like to think the term mental health because we traditionally think someone walking down the street talking to themselves. It encompasses so many more things than that. And for me, in my personal life, I became a forensic peer specialist, which is based on my own life experiences. It gives me the opportunity to go back into the prison system to support those persons with behavioral health challenges so that they can get those challenges and get the support and help that they need, the treatment that they need, so they can re-enter society and be functional, productive citizens. I function despite my symptoms. If you ask anybody about mental health or bipolar or post-traumatic stress, if I told them that I was diagnosed with bipolar, they would think, the total opposite. But I'm not my diagnosis, and that's what we have to make sure that we have these systems in place inside of the prisons. Don't wait till they get home. Because a lot of times these men and women don't know until they're in that situation. Just being in that situation, encompasses different behavioral health challenges in itself, abandonment, depression, the trauma that they see among other inmates. So it's a layered thing. It's like pulling the layers off an onion, and you cry off each layer. But then you're also finding a healing in that layer. So for me, one of my huge avenues, like for me, I've helped 16 people in the state of Georgia get their pardons. I didn't have money to get my pardon to pay an attorney. The internet wasn't up back then like how it is now. I'm 50 years old. So at that point, it wasn't like how it is now. So for me, having those 16 people be able to get their pardons and become truck drivers and buying an 18-wheeler so they can be productive citizens, to become a registered nurse so that way they can go back and take care of some of the people who thought that wrote them off. But the small barrier piece that everybody missed they had a mental health, they had trauma from their past, childhood traumas. So for me, again, it just goes back to the traumas. Everybody has traumas. We just deal with them in different ways. And until we have those candid conversations, like the judge said, for me as a Black woman, I walked around for a long time just thinking every Black woman was bipolar, because that was a term that was so loosely used. And I just kind of accepted that. But until I realized, hey, my behaviors aren't conducive to move me forward to the next phase of my life. There are other people I see who have the same challenges in my neighborhood, in my community. So why not let me be an agent of change and model that behavior and show them, hey, get your pardon. Hey, go see a therapist. It's okay. It doesn't knock any cool points off. And I think in our community, in the Black community, mental health or behavioral health has been a very taboo topic. So I can appreciate the prison systems and the justice system even open the doors to bring in forensic peers so that we can have these open, candid conversations.
Yeah, thank you so much. Elena, building off of that, what have you seen in terms of how do restorative practices change communities?
Yes, Tawana said a lot that I was agreeing with, because a lot of what I feel about community is, I mean, we're starting with community, we're building community. The punitive system as it's set up now, there is this stigma against anyone who has, committed a crime, who has been caught, who has gone to jail. There's a stigma that it's a moral failing. They are not good people. It's you as a bad person versus us, or me as somebody who hasn't done that, and it's divisive. So in our small community with our community accountability program, I went into it because I had a very short stint in law enforcement, and it didn't sit well with me because it was my friends. I grew up in a very poverty-stricken area of New Mexico. So these were my friends, they were my family. My own son has had legal system dealing. So I was watching this, and working for the police department kind of didn't fit for me. So watching that and seeing this divisiveness between everybody, there was no community there. Moral failing, you're a bad person. So with the restorative practices, it builds that community. I saw people come in to be volunteers for the panel who were there for punitive reasons. We're gonna teach them a lesson. We're gonna teach them that they can do better. But what ended up happening is they found out that there are so many layers to this. There's, socioeconomic status, there's racial bias. There's just a lot going on. Trauma is so pervasive, and mental illness. I can tell you, I would say probably 60% of the participants who came before us struggled with mental illness or mental health in some shape or fashion. And that's only because those people told us. We could ask them any questions we wanted. So that was how we were finding out, wow, this is really a lot more than just this person stole a bunch of stuff from Walmart. This is, there's a lot to this. This dad couldn't afford his rent because he got laid off because the company closed. This mom was struggling and had to choose. Do I get diapers or do I get formula? What do I choose? Can I steal this? So once people started peeling back all these layers, those panel members are then taking this information out and they're telling their friends, they're telling their family, like, wow, it is not what you think it is. Let's talk about all these different layers. So it was a very small impact in just our community, but the hope is that it's going to ripple outward. And that's just the panel members. Let's talk about the individuals who are sitting before these restorative practices and who are getting this opportunity to take accountability for them, for their actions, to say, yeah, I need social support, I need help. And again, building that community of saying, I'm here for you. You are not a bad person. This is just a symptom, a much larger symptom of our systems here. So let's work together to find out what works for you. What can we do to help you? So I believe restorative practices are building community in so many different ways. And I'm going to go on a limb and say, victims of crime don't want to see somebody suffer more. If they can get what they feel is like, okay, this person is actually working to be better. A lot of people were really excited about that in our programs. They were like, we don't want to see this person suffer. We want them to be better. We want them to do better. So recommending mental health treatment, recommending social services, you know, in the way of whether it be, you know, applying for WIC, applying for Medicaid, those sorts of things. The victims in our panel were excited about that and happy about that. And it really did build that community among everybody, because now it wasn't us versus them, it was all of us building together.
It's interesting because, Elaine, as you speak to that, because so many people that I've dealt with, especially folks coming out of systems of care like child welfare or prison, they've been victimized as well. It's just that at the point in time, they now find themselves wearing the hat of defendant. And if we, and what I think was so important is to create a space so people can be heard, so that they feel that they are heard with sincerity and empathy, not sympathy, but with empathy, with compassion. Then suddenly that gives them courage enough to say, well, maybe I need to listen to Ms. Jackson as she says, you know, maybe I should go to the behavioral health person, you know, because Ms. Jackson hit it on the head. You know, Black people don't like going to mental health folks because culturally, and oftentimes many people of color don't like doing that, whether, you know, whatever color they are, because there's a cultural prohibition. You don't tell my business. You don't tell the family business. Don't tell about my auntie who was locked in the basement, who was clearly fluidly psychotic, but I'm not going to tell anybody about that because that's going to reflect somehow how people view me. And finally, the thing that oftentimes that we should not be defined by a single act that we engage in. And that's what we do with young people. They do stuff, and you know, we always say, well, what were you thinking? Well, of course, we know the human brain, adolescent brain science says that it doesn't develop until you're probably fully 25 to 29. And my wife says it's actually much older than that because she's still waiting for me to do have some maturity showing. But we have these systems that really punish people and define them and label them. And the label goes on forever. It's that invisible F that is on your forehead, which is felon, that follows you around, that keeps you from getting a job or housing or access to education.
Absolutely. Tawana, I see your hand. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback off what both Elena and Judge Wesley said. What he said is, I can recall having an aunt who had behavioral health challenges. She had been to jail. Most of us know who are in the South, heard of Milledgeville. She had been to Milledgeville, but they would hide her in the back. And, you know, she didn't come out to like the 1st or the 3rd of the month when it was time to like take her to the bank. And we all knew that she was different, but, you know, it wasn't a name for it. It wasn't a diagnosis for it. So we just culturally, what happens in this house stays in this house. You don't tell nobody what goes on here. This your great aunt, and let it be. So I think that we perpetuated those ideas, and it allowed us to kind of make this again be a taboo topic. And I like the idea of putting myself out there. Yes, I had 8 felonies, but what makes it so great is I work for the state now. I contract with the state. Nobody else who doesn't have 8 felonies can get this job that I have. Not promoting you to go get 8 felonies, but it's a way for people who've already been down this road to see an outlet, to see that, you know, quote unquote recovery or a new normal is possible. So for me, conversations like this, so that we'll come out of the wall of stigma, because a lot of it has to do with stigma and the shame. I walked around for years, even though I had been in the military, when it was time for me to fill out a job application and it came to that box where it says, are you a felon? Do I check no and hope that they don't, you know, run a background check? and then they think I'm a liar, or do I check yes and they just automatically throw my application to the back? Allow me an opportunity to get at the table, because a lot of the experience that we have, and again, it's not giving me a pass for anything I've done. I've used these experiences to be able to assist others, so that way they'll be able to navigate their life after, or even prevent this from happening to them. So it's really vital. A lot of it goes back when Judge was talking about the youth. If you think about the anger, and I'm sure he can attest to this, those young people were angry. I'm sure every time they were angry, but anger is nothing but an emotional and a behavioral, disorder. So if we can get to the core and the root of what some of the challenges and problems are that stem from home, school, peer pressure, or whatever, then I really feel like we can curb a lot of this school to prison pipeline, or just overall statistics as we see in the prison system.
Thank you all. So the next question, I'm going to combine two sort of topics that I'm guessing people are curious about. First, so I'm going to ask this to you, Judge St. Clair, and anybody else that wants to weigh in on it is welcome to as well. So what do you say to any critics of restorative practices in a justice setting who might say, oh, that's a soft approach, that's soft on crime? And the other thing I'm curious about is, what is the relationship with law enforcement, and how do they view restorative practices, and what was your engagement with them on creating practices that worked for the community?
That's a complex response that I would have to give you. Because we had this one program that we initiated with certain low-level crimes, specifically resisting arrest, obstructing, assault of a police officer, kind of the low-level felonies as well, misdemeanors, the low-level felonies. And it required the officer to participate in a circle process with the other party, the person that caused the harm. And there was great reluctance to do that, unless there was an incentive that says, and if you participate in this, we'll forego any internal affairs complaint process that oftentimes might arise out of it. But you also found the power dynamics working, because you would set up a circle, and both sides get to bring their support person, but the officer would show up in uniform armed, and oftentimes with a colleague in uniform armed, to again it sends this non-verbal message. Actually, it's verbal, but it's a picture, but it's non-verbal, because the message is, yeah, I'm armed and you're not, and I have the power and you don't. I always tell people this is not soft on crime, because most people would say, oh, I'd rather sit in jail for a couple of days as opposed to confront the person and to share with them sometimes a very emotional interchange that occurs, because the person who was harmed is really typically pretty upset about it, a burglary, and somebody comes into their house, takes something out, a violation of trust oftentimes might occur. Oftentimes the young person is really challenged to face that, and I've had people say, send me to jail for 5 days. I'd rather do the jail than go in and confront this, because our process actually had it was a longer term commitment. Oftentimes it was several months involved, and there'd be several circles involved in it, and in the course of those circles, actually both sides, some victims didn't want to participate, so you would have surrogate representation of victims that were present, but the ones who did oftentimes found themselves disclosing things about themselves that also they felt troubled about. You know, I learned my circle practice from the Tlingit Yukon tribe clan, and with Barry Stewart, Judge Stewart from Canada, and Mark Wedge, as well as Kay Prentice. And so it's really based upon the foundation of creating relationships. Where, you know, as a keeper, you create the space for the conversations to occur, and if it's done well, then by the time you exit, everyone has grown, everyone has matured, everyone feels that there is a healing process. Sometimes it's a healing, oftentimes it's a healing, it's a familial healing that has occurred, because we would include family members in it as well, from both sides, both the complaining, the victim. See, everyone wants to be called victim, but the reality is everybody that I saw was a victim at one point or another. Everyone that I saw had trauma, unresolved trauma, and that our modalities of engaging with that trauma are very challenging. And our behavioral health system, no offense to folk, but oftentimes they're not geared for people of color, because it's, you know, one, it's stigmatized. I need to go to this office, and the office has mental health on it, and you go behind the closed door, and it becomes very challenging to sustain it. So, you know, in some ways, I always find circle keeping to be pretty therapeutic for a variety of reasons, because it gives you the opportunity to be self-reflective. But it's not an easy task. This is not hug a thug, is what, you know, sometimes was a terminology that was used. You know, you guys are just gonna be hug and thug. I said, come do this, come try this. Come sit with me as I sit in these spaces and watch the tears flow from males and females, where there's vulnerability. Authentic vulnerability is built, and in that vulnerability comes relationship, trust, and in that trust comes an opportunity to actually move a conversation, for there to be growth, so that, oh, I'm not defined by this one act that I did. So.
Thank you. One quick follow-up question that I wanted to ask to that. So in my community, I live in Des Moines, Iowa. They do the restorative circles in churches, and that's a safe place. That's why they choose to do them there. But they really ask the people, like, what feels like a safe place to you. And so I was just kind of curious, where do you do the circles for your community?
Oftentimes community centers.
Okay.
Libraries are a pretty good place to do them, you know, when they have their conference room. In our new court facility that we built a couple of years back, we created a large room that can be divided off into smaller kind of circle rooms, very intentionally in the construction of it. Churches can be, there's a sense of safety that is there, but at the same time, sometimes churches have also been the site of trauma.
Fair, definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any thoughts they want to share related to the concept of soft approach, or anything you want to share about engagement with law enforcement, involvement with law enforcement?
I can share that. For me, I'm a part of the GIPSTIC here in Georgia, which is the Georgia Safety and Patrol, and also NAMI. I'm sure Elena knows about the styles training, where we train alongside law enforcement, sharing our own mental health stories. So I think it's really important that the community, and even everyone on this panel, I mean, everyone who's here, to be proactive and engaged with law enforcement. I mean, before my own personal, you know, engagement with the criminal justice system, I had that traditional mindset, even though I had been in the military. Culturally, you just stay away from the police. I don't want no problems with the police. But what I found in my own recovery is that they've been my hugest advocates and assets, because now I'm able to tell them, hey, when you see a person who may be under self-medicating, or who might be in a mental health crisis, I can articulate what some of those behaviors might be, so that way they won't be so aggressive, or so that way they won't take them straight to jail, and they can give them some of the resources that have been mentioned. The resources are out there. It's just that a lot of times we don't seek them out, or we feel like we don't want to do the hard work. I didn't want to do it. I sat in support groups for 18 months. I had been in the military. I feel like no one could tell me that. But guess what? Had me not sat in those support groups, going to therapy, listen to somebody, quote unquote, tell me what to do, and be open to the advice and the resources that they gave, I would not be here today. So I really think it's important that we form these community networks where we host events. I mean, that's what I do. I host events and bring law enforcement, local law enforcement in, have one of the local CIT trained officers. CIT is crisis intervention trained, have them to come in. Those officers know about persons who may be under the influence, instead of taking that person straight to jail. Just because they're high don't mean they necessarily have to go to jail. Nobody wants to get high. Nobody wants to go out and do those things that, cause them the other behaviors or the other underlying issues associated with those self-medicating behaviors. So if we educate our law enforcement the same way how we're educating the public, then I think that we'll have better results in the long term. So again, it's about us connecting with them and not shying away. They get a bad name. I don't think that's fair. And like the judge said earlier, instead of sitting back talking, I always say in the world, there are watchers, wishers, and workers. People who sit back and watch everything that go on, people who sit back and wish they would change everything, and then you got the ones who are out there actually doing the work to make things happen. So I encourage everybody to be a worker in your own small world.
Love that. Thank you. Elena, go ahead.
I just wanted to piggyback off of Judge St. Clair's, what he was talking about, it being, it's not soft, it's hard to go through these practices. It's hard to talk about, peel back those layers and figure out, okay, where is this, behavior stemming from? It's hard to work through the systems that are in place now to try to get the services that you need, whether it be mental health, whether it be social support. There's medical care, child care. There are so many layers to this that these are not easy systems to work through. So to say it's an easy thing to just, have them go through a restorative program, that's not easy. We're working against a lot of systems that don't work in the first place, which is how we've gotten here. So it is definitely a huge community effort trying to get everybody to work together. And I'll always go back to my own personal experience as a panel and chairperson, panel member and chairperson of that community accountability program. But I had mental health experience because I worked at a local mental health agency for years. My own son went through the system. My friends have gone through the system. I worked in the system briefly as law enforcement. So I had all of these little pieces. So when I had a case, I could walk that person through this through the program. I had that empathy, that understanding, and could help them with the tips and tricks that they needed to get through the system. And that's what it takes, is those of us who have this knowledge and privilege and power to know these systems, to say, here, let me walk you through this, instead of just letting you float alone on your own figuring this out, because that's what happens in the legal system. But here, let me hold your hand and work with you. Let me jump in this hole with you. I've been here, I know what it's like. Let's go forward with this.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to transition over to some audience questions. There's a lot of questions. We won't get to them all, but we'll get to as many of them as we can. So Eric, I'm going to send the first one to you. So the question that some folks are wondering about is, how do you start a restorative justice practice in your community, and particularly of interest, how do you get your school district engaged?
Well, the first thing that you want to do is become trained by somebody that's competent, that's a competent trainer. I suggest Talking Peace, and that will cover both of those areas. It's starting with the foundation of restorative justice, which is building relationships and having an acute understanding of what justice is. Just listening to the conversation that we just got finished having about soft on crime. That's problematic because our justice system is tied to our morality. So we have to untie that and work on our values. And that's why I didn't want you to abandon restorative justice, because the justice that we're trying to restore is the justice that our value presents to the world. RJ, those two words doesn't make sense together. Restorative justice, because we're constantly thinking about our justice system. Once we change the way we're thinking and think about the system of justice that's within us. In fact, if you think about the times where you've seen justice, it's the earth. The earth provides justice for us every time, and it forgives us for misusing that justice. And babies, when we care for babies, it's the ultimate form of showing justice. And babies give it right back. Babies know how to show us the things that they value, which are food, sleep, and play. And we go out our way to find out which one of those things is the need, so we can give it to that baby so we can satisfy the need. The fourth thing that babies need is to learn. And that's where justice gets shifted, because they're learning from us, unjust human beings. So the practice of restoring the justice that's inside of us is important. So like once we learn, like what is the justice inside of us and what that's telling us to do, we can learn how to reform these communities. Restorative justice is finding out what is our common value system and how do we use those values to get the things that we need and want from and for our community. So we find out what the need is, and then we find out what values we hold as a community to achieve those needs, and we just do it. There are going to be roadblocks in the way. Those roadblocks are going to come from people that look exactly like you if you're an adult. With all the achievements that we've had in restorative justice, I've been asked, now keep it real, did y'all really eliminate suspensions and raise graduations for 10 years in a row? And they ask, did y'all just stop suspending, or did the behavior actually change? And my answer is, the adults absolutely changed their behavior, and then the young people follow suit. So once the adults change their behavior and change their mindset, there's nowhere we can't go as a society.
Thank you, Eric. Here's a follow-up question to that, and I'm going to point it to you, Judge St. Clair, but anybody else feel free to add in if you like. What is the role of parents in restorative justice or restorative practices?
Well, parents are critical. A supportive adult, whether it's there's a blood relationship, there's a fictive relationship. I mean, I got lots of uncles who were not blood related, but they engage that mentor role. And so you got to have somebody who is a willing ear, who is supportive, oftentimes can offer reflective truths, so that you can't be codependent and say my kid doesn't do any wrong. You really have to call it like it is, but also be engaged in a willingness to commit to it long term. And it's not just children, parents, because I'm an orphan at this point in time, but my mom, were she alive, she'd still be my mom, and that would be my parent. And so the parent role kind of continues lifelong. And so, it's really being that, I think, the supportive adult is critical. And for parents to be a model of not only a role model, but also a model for understanding and listening. They need to engage in the process, because I think Eric said it so well, and I'll phrase it a little bit differently, but as the head goes, so goes the body. So if you have the leadership of the group engaging in certain behaviors, then others are going to kind of say, oh yeah, we should be doing that as well. Eric, please.
Parents need to be parented. If you're in the know, just be contagious. So like all of us can get that. I am not above, I'm 48. I am not above being parented by anybody younger or older than me that's in the know that can discipline me. And when I say discipline, I mean disciple for me, lead me. So I think that as a village, we're all parents if we're in the know and if our heart's in the right place. So the role for parents is become the best parents you can be so you can help parents parent.
Love that. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna send this question to Elena or Tawana, and I'm combining two questions, but you'll get the essence of what I'm asking here. So there are some people on the call that are wondering, how can community groups like NAMIs, like church groups, other faith groups, if they want to bring something like restorative practices to their community, how can they start that conversation? How can they be advocates for starting restorative practices? I know you both have connections with NAMIs, so that's why I'm asking you.
I will say from my own experience with the panel that I was involved with, that panel was actually conceived and born from a law enforcement officer at our local police department. He had a very deep philosophy that we were not really fixing the root issue of what was causing crime in our community. So therefore, he advocated on his own. He looked up these programs in other areas of the country and advocated it for our county, and it was instituted throughout our county. So our county was kind of divided into 3 sections. So eventually ended up in, all 3 sections. So I would say one of the biggest things you have to do is you have to be data driven. Get the numbers, let them know how restorative practices work, what the successes are. Eric shared a lot of good numbers at the end of that documentary I saw there. I was like, wow, it brought tears to my eyes, because that's what we need to see. Judge St. Clair, has, I'm sure, numbers. Getting those numbers, taking them to your local police chief or anybody you can talk with at your police department, but really engaging with your DA's office as well, because the DA's office was the one who kind of ran the program for the entire county, and it kind of filtered down from there. So get that data, advocate for it, keep advocating for it, keep going. If they don't answer you, keep going for it. There's a change in the DA, go after them. You have to be persistent, but you're going to have to prove the data as well, because there is such a stigma still against these practices that you're going to have to do a lot of the legwork and be that advocate for these practices.
Yeah, I definitely agree with her. I can recall starting to do this work about 7 years ago. And in my hometown back in Columbus, I would host these events and, I would beg the police to come out and beg the mayor to come out, and no one would show up at that time, just like she said, because I didn't have numbers. I didn't have anything to show them that I had already been doing the work. So I had to regroup, went back, started doing the work, helping people get pardons, get my name out there, doing speaking engagements. 2 years later, came back to my hometown, send out the same request, and I had the mayor there, I had the DA there, because they had saw me do the work over the past 2 years, and my name had gotten out there. I was connecting directly with the police officers. If I couldn't catch them at the police station, they didn't want to talk when I would go there and say I was too busy. Anytime I saw an officer in public, I would ask them, are you CIT trained? Some would say yes, some would say no. I would hand them a card. I would let them know, hey, I'm just here. So I want your force to be 100% trained in CIT training. The ones who didn't know would ask. So what that does is just create a relationship. From there, what you do is use all the capital resources that you got. I started with 2 other veterans like myself. One was a male, one was a female, who had been formerly incarcerated. We kept meeting up. We would go to Starbucks. Then another person would see somebody, well, what are you guys doing? And before we knew it, we had this huge network. But you have to be the change that you want to see. And again, like Elena said, I wasn't a huge social media person, but my kids make me love it now, because anytime I advocate, that's proof. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. So for me, it's a way for me to be able to have tangible data and a tangible record to show what I'm doing, because that opened the doors for more resources to be able to come your way. Connect with the churches. People will allow you those free spaces. People are really giving if they're seeing that you're trying to help the community. Ask, could you use these spaces? Go to the police station and ask, hey, do you have an officer who's available for maybe 30 minutes on a Zoom call? Start it out virtually. If you can do it once a month, they'll be more than willing to send someone to join in. And before you know it, you'll have those connections and go to the city council meetings. You have to really get involved to be involved. So for me, that's what I would encourage anyone to do. And once you make those networks, you'll be able to facilitate and just get like-minded people, and just any way that you can advocate in this arena, do it.
Thank you.
I wanted to add really quick, Nina, I'm sorry.
Please. No, go ahead.
When you're working with your systems, your DA's office, your county office, your mayor, your police department, they're not going to do the heavy lifting for you. They're busy. And if they don't already have a passion for this work, they're not going to do the heavy lifting. So it's going to be up to us to do the heavy lifting and showing this information to them, because once we can show them that there's tangible proof that this works, that it might be a little bit hard to get it started, but let me do some of the heavy lifting for you so you don't have to do it. I think you're going to get a lot more willing ears to hear you out and move forward.
So I'm going to back up for a minute. We maybe should have done this question much earlier, but I'm curious if any of you have like a 30-second description of the circle process, because we didn't clearly define it. And I want to make sure everybody understands what that is. What does that look like? What does that entail? Can we back up to that? And if anybody has a quick description.
Well, I can describe it physically, but there's a certain magic that occurs in the course of circles. So people sit in a physical circle, and the middle is a centerpiece, oftentimes developed by items that people may bring to the circle. It's certain, at least the ones I engage in, are pretty ritualized. There's an opening statement, there's keepers, and keepers are kind of different than facilitators, because keepers are the creator of the space. They hold the space, they don't define the space. Actually, from my experience, the space is defined. It could be anywhere from, I've seen circles as small as 5 to 40. Young people really like the big circles, and it is creating that space. So it has a talking piece, which is the instrument that while you hold it, you get to talk and everyone has to listen. And so if it's a circle with 10 people in it, then you're typically going to talk 1/10 of the time, and you'll be listening 9/10 of the time. The talking piece goes a certain order, and you don't get to talk again until that talking piece comes back to you. So oftentimes what has triggered you, what someone said, by the time it gets back to you, other people may have addressed it, are, you really have the thought process leads you to a different place. Then there's a closing ceremony that we use, poems or sayings from leaders of the world, Maya Angelou, other folk, John Lewis, and the kind of helps to set the frame and the tone of, and the conversation is what arises in the course of the 2.5 hours that you're sitting in circle. And, and circles come in a variety of ways, from talking circles or celebration circles, birthday circles, to the more complex circles, which are conflict resolution, reentry circles. Those are the ones that oftentimes are a lot more challenging and, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, let me see what other questions we have here. Oh, here's one. This one again would probably be for the judge, but if anybody else wants to add in, feel free. In a court setting, in a justice system setting, is restorative justice just for youth, or can adults also be involved in restorative justice opportunities?
I've seen it in both places. It is typically where I've seen it really effective in youth settings, but the principles is what I think are important long term. We operate a very retributive system. We want to pound the flesh. And we, as a criminal processing system, we are addicted. Our only currency that we really have is incarceration. So we're kind of addicted to incarceration. The belief is the more jail you have, the more punishment there is, and the more rehabilitation that will take place. Well, jail is not a place that there's a lot of healing, and there's not a lot of treatment that occurs in jail. Jail is a very violent environment, and that's what it teaches. It doesn't teach you how to re-engage in the community as a whole. It doesn't teach you how to be a parent. It doesn't teach you how to be a significant other. I believe, my belief is it can be used in every single setting. And in, I've hear victims regularly say, there's not enough prison time being given. And oftentimes they're victims of, very serious crimes, rape, murder. But actually that's a pretty small percentage of the number of crimes that are out there. So I'm looking at those other crimes where when you talk to victims, where they come in, I just don't want to see this happen to anyone else. What are the services that we can give? And we're not good at that. So from my perspective, we need to be better at trying to provide services as opposed to just looking at using the currency that we have, which is more jail, more jail, more jail.
Elena.
I'll go on to say, yes, by all means, you can have these type of programs for adults and for youth. In our county, we call it YAP, the Youth Aid Panel, and that's where this practice started, was with the youth. But then, Officer Lee decided, hey, we could use this at the adult level too. There's nothing that says that we can't use this at the adult level. Why aren't we doing this? Because you figure there's a lot of 18-year-olds who are no longer in the youth system, who are doing kid stuff and getting caught for it. And now they have a record. A lot of these kids were trying to go to college, getting, scholarships. They were trying to get into the military or even just get a job. And it was preventing a lot of them from attaining those goals. So this can absolutely be used at the adult level. And I think that there's no reason it shouldn't be used at that level.
Thank you, everybody, for weighing in on that. Eric, question for you. People are wondering, how is your family doing? How is your son?
Oh, right on. Okay. My family's fine. Trey lives in San Jose. He's currently going through like his first real girlfriend situation. And I'm really not liking it, but he's going fine. I actually just saw him like 3 days ago. I went out to California to go and check him out. Yeah, and he's all right. He's grown to be a really good man. And that's all I hope for him. I didn't care what he grew up to be, except a good man. He's growing. He's learning how to be a good man, and I think he likes me more.
Great.
He's got a good role model, Eric. Just to be real.
Right on. I mean, I can't say it myself. Somebody else has to say that. Somebody else has to.
That's why I'm saying it, because let me blow your horn for that.
Like, make it plain, Your Honor.
Just another plug for the film, the Circles film. When you watch that documentary, you'll hear Eric's story and about his son and all the work they're doing. So, yeah, Eric, tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. What things are happening?
Well, currently we are. The organization is called Talking Peace, and we do trainings of everything restorative justice, which is everything. Like Your Honor was saying, like we can use restorative justice in all arenas, and we test the limits as much as we possibly can. Over the pandemic, we did a whole bunch of circles with white people specifically around race, and because we were hearing a lot of things on the news about race and politics, and in our country, that's hard things to talk about, and we're only as good as the hardest things that we can do. So we had a lot of conversation with white women, mostly about not seeing race, not seeing color. What are some of the other topics we had? White silence. We talked a lot about the pandemic, and it brings me to a point that I've been wanting to make. How as a Black man, my pain, whether it be poverty, mental health, drug addiction, etc., is often criminalized. So I wanted to speak to the point that we were talking about before, about bringing restorative justice into the justice system and into the jails. I've been to many prisons to have circles with the men, and the men understand that a lot of times their problems are criminalized rather than the crime that they committed. So it's important that they have these conversations where they can be listened to and they can be vulnerable enough to express who they really are. When we call people that do bad stuff criminals, we have to criminalize them. And if they're criminals, we put them in jail. And oftentimes that's not the answer. I mean, we're thinking about how many Black men are in jail right now, and I'm trying to get somebody to put the statistics, but it's a lot. And I'm not naive enough to believe that all of those beautiful Black men are criminals. I think that their problems have been criminalized. I think that we as Black Americans are suffering from PTSD. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. And we just have compound trauma, and we push it down and push it down and push it down. And the answer isn't, and the question isn't, is it one day gonna blow up? It's upon whom and where.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, definitely.
Right on.
Next question, I'm going to go to Tawana. Tawana, the question would be, what do you see as the role for peer support specialists in restorative justice or restorative practices?
They are definitely here in Georgia. I mean, Georgia's like, woohoo, Georgia, we are like leading the way with restorative justice.
Yes.
CPSs, certified peer specialists. Not to toot my own horn, but I love my lived experience because I had to dedicate time and energy to the recovery, just as a degree. So I really honor that recovery journey in anybody else. So any certified peer specialist, certified CARES, which we call it here in Georgia, certified addiction recovery empowerment specialist, forensic specialist, which is a person who's been formerly incarcerated, but now goes back into the criminal justice system to support others who have less than 18 months under. So absolutely peer support services are needed. I can speak personally for myself. I started out, working just traditionally under the mental health field. But once I realized I could work with people who were self-medicating and been in jail, that is my passion. So I kind of navigated from under that mental health umbrella to, because it was more relatable for me. So yes, to answer the question, peer support is definitely needed. I think that a lot of people are probably why we don't see it as much all over the country as we do in Georgia. I'll go back to stigma. Who wants to tell somebody that they had 8 felonies? Who wants to tell somebody that they, the shame, all that comes along with it, and you have to do that journey. So I think that just bringing the awareness about it and let people know that these are alternatives and these are options. So that way they won't just sit back and allow that crime to hold them back for the rest of their duration. So absolutely, they are necessary. I would encourage anybody that I come in contact with, if they're incarcerated, always encourage them to say, hey, ask about a forensic peer specialist. Ask if your facility, has access to a forensic peer specialist. Ask about higher education. Ask about beyond the box, because these things are accessible. It's just that if we don't know, we don't know. So yes, they are necessary. Make sure that you advocate. Go to your state's whatever your state's behavioral health premier behavioral health agency is. Advocate for peer support services to be a part of the educational system and a part of the criminal justice system. Absolutely.
I've also found that another peer support model that has been very effective is kind of the credible messenger model, where you use folks who have the lived experience as there are your entree into engaging with folks who oftentimes are engaging in more risky behavior. And the credible messenger model kind of actually gives you a program of how to engage pretty effectively, so that you are able to see the progression. It would be great if it's important to understand that this is not a quick fix. Oftentimes jurisdictions, legislative bodies are looking for, we want a quick fix. Well, oftentimes it's just not a quick fix model, but it takes years of investment for you to start reaping the rewards of it. But there are sites that this occurs in. I'll reiterate, Oakland, Arjoy has done a fabulous job in Oakland, and really I see them as one of the stellar, Fania Davis and stellar institutions of what can occur if you put the investment in there, and that you stay authentic to the process. One of the problems that I think institutions have is that they always want to put their label on it. They want to put their flavor on it, and institutional flavors oftentimes become corrupted. They don't stick to the purity of the model. And when you don't stick to the purity of the model, the outcome kind of dissipates and changes. And that's why oftentimes it should be community-based, but community-based and a real model, so that people who are doing the work are earning living wages and are getting the respect that they need. Acknowledgement that is important, because the work is actually quite critical.
All right, thank you for that additional information on peer support. I'm going to take us to our closing questions since we're coming in on time here. Question for you, for all of you, but I'll let you know who should go when. What's something that you want the audience to know about restorative justice, or about similar alternative programs or community restorative practices? What do you want to leave the audience with? Tawana, I'm going to start with you.
I'd like to leave them with being directly impacted by the justice system wasn't the end all be all for me. It was actually just a new beginning. It allowed me to be able to actually, I don't think if I had been incarcerated, I would be helping people at the capacity that I'm doing. So I want to leave them with that it's not an end all be all. There are various resources out here. There are various advocates out here. Take access to those resources, use the support groups, get connected. Recovery is about connection. When you re-enter, I know there's a lot of stigma surrounding us, but look into the Georgia Justice Project or whatever state that you're in and see about getting your pardon, see about getting contracts, you know, with the state, because what I found is I didn't know anything else but the criminal justice system and how to be a veteran. I wasn't able to go back into the military anymore. So the best thing I was able to do was to use my lived experience to be able to advocate and support for others. So that's what I found my value in. And I would ask that anybody who's been justice impacted to find the value. You know, there's a story in there. You know, most people say, well, I took that L. I didn't take an L. I learned a lesson. I didn't take a loss. You know, I learned a lesson. And the lesson is greater because now I'm able to impact others. So use this as an opportunity. Connect with law enforcement. I keep going back to law enforcement because for me, and when I say law enforcement, I mean the DAs, I mean the judges, I mean the whole spectrum of the criminal justice system. You know, go to those city council meetings, get connected, because you will find out I have more in common with the cops who arrested me than even the peers that I grew up with. They face the same apprehensive and afraid and fear and depression that I faced on a daily basis when I was in the military. So for me, having that connection made me feel more comfortable to be able to go and engage and interact with them. Look at law enforcement as our protectors, as a support system, as a community network. That's what I would want to leave with everyone on this panel.
Thank you. Eric, what do you want to leave the audience with today?
Well, first of all, I want to echo everything that Sister Tawana said. So all of that, and restorative justice isn't a destination; it's an everlasting journey. So when you think that we got it all down packed, stop calling it restorative justice because you're doing something else.
Thank you. Elena, what would you like to leave the audience with today?
Goodness, Tawana and Eric, so much already. But honestly, you know, just be the change that you want to see. Do the work. Get your hands dirty and get out there and listen to the experiences, the lived experiences. Especially for those of us who, you know, I've not been arrested before in my life, but my son has. So it's like sitting back and listening to his experience and where he's coming from, and not thinking I have all the answers, but really listening to what would help him. So sit and listen to those who have lived experience, and be willing to do the hard work and get that done. So that way you can, you know, effectively advocate for everybody who needs these practices and restorative justice.
Thank you. Judge St. Clair, what would you like to leave the audience with?
We can do better. We really can. We have to acknowledge that we've messed up. Where we've committed our resources have not worked. And so we have to look for courageous partners, collaborators, whether they're law enforcement, community members, mental health, behavioral health specialists, young people. Young people are a beautiful source of information and inspiration. And if we create that space, then we can actually feel what's inside that space, what's something that, you know, I'm working now. I'm on the spiritual journey, because this is the spiritual, for me, it's a spiritual journey that I'm on, because I caused so much harm in the course of my career that now I need to pay back my community. And if I can do this in a way that brings others to the table, then and then I have to, you know, it's a principle, it's a way of living your life, actually. When you, it's not something that, you know, you go into circle and then you're done. When you're done, that everything goes away. For me, it's how I'm living my life. So it can be very impactful and bit to it. You know, it's an investment that's well worth it. Thank you.
Thanks. Tawana, thank you for being here today. Judge St. Clair, thank you for being here today. Elena, thank you for being here today. And Eric, a great thank you for being here today. Thank you to the audience for listening to this, to giving us your questions. We have provided the websites for those folks that have a website. Feel free to reach out to them. I know we didn't get to all the questions. We from NAMI will be sending those that are participants in the webinar. We'll send you the recording of the webinar once we have it on YouTube, so probably tomorrow. We'll also be sending you an evaluation. Please let us know what you thought of today's webinar. We love feedback. We're interested in feedback. We also want to know what additional topics you would like to hear about in the future as part of the Help Not Handcuffs series. And I think that's all I needed to tell you. So have a wonderful evening, everyone.